This video was sponsored by Skillshare. Get a 1 month free trial by following the link in the description and start learning a new skill from graphic design to cooking to animation today. 240 million years ago, there was one giant megacontinent called Pangea. Things were simpler then. You could walk from South Africa to Greenland, and Switzerland had tropical beaches. But then Pangea broke up, and now things are complicated. Today we have 7 continents, or 5, or if you're really cool, 4. It mostly depends on what language you speak or what century it is. Regardless of how many there are, they all have names. But what is an Africa? What does Asia mean? And is Australia a filthy name thief? Well, let's find out. Asia and Europe. The ancient Greeks gave us the words Europa and Asia. You see, around the 6th century BCE, the Greeks start to feel a little bit incontinent. But what continent were they in? Well, to answer that, the Greek philosophers Anaximander and Hecataeus created world maps that use Asia, Europa and Libya as the names for the 3 continents of their known world. But they didn't invent those names. The Greeks actually had no idea where those names came from. The 5th century BCE historian Herodotus said, "What puzzles me is why 3 distinct women's names have been given to what is really a single landmass. Nor can I learn who made the boundaries or for what reason they gave the names." So where did those names come from? Well, Asia just pops right into history in the 8th century BCE in the Iliad, where Asia is said to be near the Kaistros River, which is here. The Greek poet Mimnermus also called the area Lovely Asia around 630 BCE. They're not talking about a continent, they're talking about this area of Anatolia in modern day Turkey. After the Persian Empire conquered this area in the 6th century BCE, Asia in the Greek mind expanded to cover all of the Persian Empire and eventually the entire landmass east of Europe. But what does Asia mean? Well, if we go back 3,400 years before today, we find an ancient confederation here in western Anatolia called the Azawa. They led some sort of rebellion against the Hittite Empire and were crushed around 1400 BCE. But the Greeks seem to have sent some soldiers to help that rebellion. It could be that the Greeks called this area Azawa after that confederation and slowly Greekified the name into Asia. But this connection does seem pretty weak until we jump to the 1950s, when archaeologists deciphered hundreds of clay tablets from the ruins of the ancient city of Pylos that was destroyed around 1200 BCE. These tablets included hundreds of names written in an ancient form of Greek called Linear B. Some of these writings seem to be receipts for purchased slaves identified as Aswai, meaning women from Aswia, and Aswia seems to be here. So the receipts of this horrific practice of slavery gave us some evidence to show that Azawa morphed into a more Greek sounding Aswia and then finally into Asia. Moving from Asia across the Aegean, we see the word Europa pop up around 700 BCE. An ancient Greek poem mentions the rich Peloponnesus, Europa and the wave-washed isles. This is the Peloponnesus. The islands of the Aegean are the wave-washed isles, and this here, a small area on the eastern coast of Greece, is Europa. But where does that word Europa come from? Well, there are multiple theories. The ancient Greeks had a pretty simple answer. It came from their goddess, Europa. One day, a Phoenician princess, Europa, was relaxing by the seashore with her friends. Then the god Zeus laid eyes on her and immediately fell in love. Because Zeus was kind of weird. Zeus then changed himself into a white bull, because we all know ladies love bulls. This actually worked somehow and Europa climbed on the bull's back. Then Bull Zeus flew her away to Crete, where Zeus then forced himself on Europa and they conceived 3 children. A few things should raise some red flags here. 1. Zeus, super creepy. 2. Bulls are not to be trusted. And 3. Europa doesn't even go to Europe or have anything to do with the continent. This story explains nothing other than that Zeus is a creep. She's a princess from Asia and she goes to Crete. The Greeks thought that Crete was in Asia. If we go back to Herodotus, he says, as to Europe however, it is unknown from whence it got this name or from whom, unless we shall say that the land received its name from Europa. She, however, evidently belongs to Asia and did not come to Europe, but only from Phoenicia to Crete. The Europa myth seems to be an explanation for the name after it was already in use. Okay, maybe we can find some answers if we focus our attention here, in the first place called Europa, all the way back in the 8th century BCE. In this region, the word Europa pops up a lot. There was a river called Europa, and there were towns called Europos in Macedonia, Thessaly and Olympia. Alexander the Great had a sister called Europa, and ancient Macedonian rulers like Philip II were referred to as rulers of Europa, and they ruled this area. It just looks like there's a whole lot of Europa in this small area. So the word Europa has to come from here. But what does the word mean? Well, that's kinda hard to figure out. Some linguists and historians think that the word Europa comes from the ancient Greek word ouros, wide or broad, and ops, eye or face. So it would mean broad-faced, wide-eyed, or far-seeing. Ancient Greeks lived on both sides of the Aegean Sea, so maybe ancient Greeks sailing across the Aegean or up to the Black Sea might have considered the shoreline across from Asia to be broad-faced and so called it Europa. Or Greeks living on the small islands of the Aegean saw Europa as a kind of broad mainland. The Greek poet Pindar writes, "Turn around the ship to the mainland of Europa." Another possibility is that the people here in Europa worshipped an ancient earth goddess. Broad-faced or cow-faced is actually a common name for earth goddesses in ancient Indo-European mythology. And now before you go say anything, cow-faced was a compliment back then. Someone actually called me cow-faced earlier, so I think Indo-European is actually making a comeback. Indo-European is the language family Greek descends from. All the way over in India we see in the Rig Veda, Mother Earth, the wide extending broad one. Prithvi means broad here, and Prithvi is still a goddess in Hinduism whose name means broad one. The Rig Veda is written in Sanskrit, an Indo-European language, so it has a connection with ancient Greek. And other Indo-European cultures like the Celts have Litavi, another earth goddess called the Broad One. We even find mentions of an earth mother called Demeter Europa in Boeotia. Demeter is a totally Greek goddess, so maybe combining her name with Europa's might mean Europa is pre-Greek. So maybe, just maybe, there was an ancient earth goddess known as Broad-Faced or Europa, worshipped in Greece, and this area was named after her. How she got moved from here to Phoenicia and Crete is unknown. But the problem with this theory is that if Europa came from Euros plus ops, then the second U should have been preserved. Greek actually has the word Europa meaning far-seeing, so Europa should be Europa if it actually meant broad-faced, but maybe it wasn't preserved for some reason, we just don't know. I did some digging and I found the name of a king of Sicyon, which was here, called Europes, from before 1000 BCE, which means that the name could be super ancient, and some historians believe it could come from the language spoken here before Greek, and might have nothing to do with being broad-faced at all, and it might just be a coincidence that other earth goddesses were called broad-faced. Unfortunately, we'll probably never have a confident answer on where the word Europa comes from. All we know is that it originally came from here. Eventually the name Europa extended from this region to cover all of Greece and then all of Europe, probably because Greek sailors in the Aegean kept using Europa as a kind of slang for the mainland. Africa. Okay, so Europe was a mess. Thankfully, Africa is really nice and is going to give us a straightforward answer. So thanks Africa. The Greeks actually called Africa Libya, after a Berber tribe that lived west of Egypt. But after the Romans wrecked Carthage in the Punic Wars and then covered the land in salt so nothing would ever grow there again, which is pretty messed up, like who even thinks about that? Salt is for food. Anyway, after that they turned this region into the province of Africa. It seems that when the Romans landed here, they met a local Berber group called the Ifri. The Ifri seem to have lived around here in caves near the ancient city of Carthage. The Berber historian Ibn Khaldun said that the Berber word Ifri means a cave, and the same word can still be found in the name of the city of Ifrain in Morocco, and in the names of the Berber tribe known as the Banu Ifran. Ifri became Afri in Latin, and the Romans just started using Afar as a general name for people from Africa. The name Libya fell out of use and Africa Terra, the land of the Afri, took over. As more of Africa was mapped, the name extended to the whole continent. America. Depending on what language you speak, this is either one or two continents. Either way, it's called America. You've probably heard that the name comes from Amerigo Vespucci, a 16th century explorer from Florence. But Amerigo Vespucci didn't introduce America to Europe. Columbus did. So why isn't this place called Columbia? Well, Columbus, up until the day he died, claimed he landed in Asia or the Indies and thought that he hadn't found anything new. So to Europeans, Columbus had actually made the world smaller by proving Asia and Europe were only separated by a small ocean. Then in 1501, Amerigo Vespucci and Gonzalo Coelho attempted to sail around what they thought was Southeast Asia into the Indian Ocean. After sailing further and further south along the coast of Brazil, Vespucci realised that Asia as he knew it didn't go this far south. After he returned to Lisbon in 1502, Vespucci announced the discovery of a new land, which he observed to be a continent. His letters about this new world circulated through Europe in a document called Mundus Novus. These letters fell into the hands of a German cartographer, Martin Waldseemüller, who then created a new world map that embraced this new continent. This Waldseemüller map was the first to show America as separate from Asia, and right here, as the name of this new continent, we see the name America used for the first time. In the introduction to this new map, printed in April 1507, these words appeared. Europe, Asia and Africa have been extensively explored, and a fourth part of the world has been discovered by Americus Vespucius. I do not see what right anyone would have to object to calling this part after Americus, who discovered it, and so to name it America, since both Europa and Asia got their names from women. That's the usually accepted story for how America got its name. But there's just one problem with this. It's false.
It's false. It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's fiction. It's fiction. We made it up.
Well, okay, maybe not false, but there are some holes in it. You see, Waldseemüller's words tend to get read as an argument, like we should name this continent America after the man that discovered it was a continent, Amerigo. But you could read them as an explanation. Like, I do not see what right anyone would have to object to calling this part after Americus. Maybe Waldseemüller had already heard the name America, and to him the only explanation lay in the feminine version of Vespucci's first name, and he saw no reason to object to that. But there's lots of reasons to object to it. It had been tradition in Europe to name new lands using the last names of explorers and the first names of royalty and saints. Louisiana, Georgia, the Philippines and Victoria were all named using the first names of royals. The Straits of Magellan, the Seychelles, Bermuda, Vancouver's Island, Tasmania, all use the surnames of non-royalty. Only America breaks this pattern. Columbia isn't called Christophoria, it's Columbia after Christopher Columbus's surname. According to this tradition, America should be Vespuccia. Waldseemüller was a mapmaker. He knew this tradition. By breaking it, it seems he was trying to force Amerigo's name to fit with the already popular name, America. Which still didn't work because Vespucci signed his letters as Albericus Vespucius, which was his Latin name. Using Americus instead of Albericus makes it look like Waldseemüller wanted a Latinization that fit the name America, even though it wasn't the one Amerigo used. So if it was actually named after the Latinized feminine version of Amerigo, the continent should be called Alberica, not America. So if it didn't come from Amerigo's name, where the Vespucci did it come from? Well, all the way back in 1874, the English geologist Thomas Belt noted in his book The Naturalist in Nicaragua that the name America might possibly come from the Amarique mountain range in Nicaragua. In 1875, the French geologist Jules Margot made the same conclusion. The name Amarique was used by the indigenous people living there for centuries, and the area was filled with gold. And we know that Columbus landed nearby. Maybe when Columbus started demanding gold from the natives, which he loved to do, they pointed him in the direction of America. When Columbus and his companions returned to Europe, the name America spread around as the place to head to if you wanted gold. This name quickly spread from the ports into mainland Europe. Waldseemüller might have thought this word America must have come from Amerigo, and so he wrote the name America on his maps, and it stuck. Waldseemüller, more like Wrongseemüller, am I right? Ha, no, okay. Had this mistake happened in Spain or Portugal where Vespucci and Columbus were still living, maybe it would have been corrected. But it happened in Germany, and it wouldn't reach Spain until after Vespucci and Columbus were already dead. Vespucci never found out that a continent was named after him. The name started to pop up on maps across Europe. Waldseemüller himself actually tried to reverse this trend and remove the word America from his future maps. In 1513, he labelled it Terra Incognita with a note about how Columbus had discovered it. So in conclusion, America is called America because of Amerigo Vespucci, but maybe not for the reason you thought it was. Australia. The King of Islands and the smallest continent. Maybe. The name Australia means southern land in Latin. All the way back in ancient Roman times, cartographers assumed that a giant continent, the Terra Australis Incognita, or unknown southern land, existed somewhere in the southern hemisphere long before Australia or Antarctica were discovered, and they often added this unknown continent to their maps. Look, you can see it here, here, and here. They believed nature loved balance, and since there was so much land in the northern hemisphere, there had to be an equal amount of land in the southern one. They just hadn't found it yet. So when the Dutch bumped into Australia in the 1600s, they called it New Holland and not Terra Australis because they still assumed a much larger Terra Australis was still out there waiting to be found. By the 1800s, people were starting to think that the probability of discovering another southern landmass equal in size to New Holland was unlikely. In 1814, Matthew Flinders completed the first circumnavigation of New Holland, proving it was an isolated continent, and published the book A Voyage to Terra Australis. Flinders assumed a larger Terra Australis did not exist, and so he wanted the name Australia applied to New Holland because that was the next best thing. Flinders popularised the name Australia, which was then adopted as the new name of the land a few years later. Antarctica. Cold, desolate, harsh, devoid of life. No, I'm not describing your mandatory office parties, I'm talking about Antarctica. This continent was only discovered in 1820 by a Russian expedition, and so being the last continent discovered was also the last one named. The annoying thing for geographers was that this continent had been named for over 1,000 years, but then Australia went ahead and just stole that name, and so they had to settle for Antarctica, which comes from the Greek anti and arctikos, literally opposite to the Arctic. Arctikos is the Greek name for the constellation of the Great Bear, Ursa Major, which can mostly only be seen in the northern hemisphere. Arctikos comes from Arctos, which means bear. So this landmass, that is where people thought Terra Australis was, isn't called Terra Australis. It's named instead after a constellation not really visible in its hemisphere, which in turn is named after an animal not found anywhere near Antarctica. This place is full of penguins, and I see no reason to object to calling this place Penguinia, after the penguins that discovered it. The only way to make my dream of Penguinia become a reality is by making my own world map just like Waldseemüller. But I have no idea how to draw cool maps like him. I guess I'll just have to head over to Skillshare and watch Ira Marx's class Fantasy Maps, the art of exploring imaginary worlds. This class doesn't just teach you how to draw incredible, beautiful looking maps. It also tells you about the historical context behind map making and all the symbols that pop up on them throughout history. It was a great time. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. Members get unlimited access to all classes, so you can explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in an almost infinite number of new things to learn. If you've ever wondered how I learned to animate these videos, then Skillshare is the answer. The class Animating with Ease by Jake Bartlett pushed my animation skills light years ahead of where they once were. The great thing about this class is that the files and assets are free for you to download, and so you can dive in and learn from them at your own pace. On Skillshare, Mike Boyd can teach you how to learn any skill. Ali Abdal can make you a productivity master. Dozens of people can teach you how to cook, draw, animate, garden, build a business, and much, much more. In less than 1 hour, you could pick up a new creative skill. Skillshare is designed specifically for learning. There are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. This was simply about the names of the continents. The validity and history of the idea of continents is a whole other video that we'll make someday. But if you'd like to know more, you can always find the sources used in the description. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there are links for our Patreon and our merch store also in the description. I really hope you enjoyed this video and bye!